Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone here to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission for Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. I'd like to open the meeting at 7:30. May we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May I have roll call, please?
Mr. Carpenter?
Here.
Mr. Fitzer?
Here.
Mr. Colber? Mr. Kucera?
Here.
Mr. Nushai?
Here.
Ms. Redmond?
Here.
Mr. Scott? Mr. Solomon?
Here.
Mr. Tinlin?
Here.
So we're all here except for Mr. Scott and Mr. Colbert, who notified me that they weren't going to be able to make it. Thank you. I'll look for approval of the agenda as it stands. Anyone have any trouble with tonight's agenda? Nothing to change. I will approve it as it is. We'll move on to approval of the regular meeting minutes from May 28th, 2024.
Motion to approve minutes from May 28th, 2024.
Support.
Motion support. Any changes? Seeing none, may I have roll call, please?
Mr. Kucera?
Yes.
Mr. Nushai?
Yes.
Ms. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Solomon?
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 6 is public discussion for items that are not on the agenda. Is anyone from the public wishing to opine on anything? Oh, don't want to say anything yet. Okay, that's fine. In that case, I will close public discussion then. We'll go on to agenda item number 7, which is a zoning ordinance amendment discussion. We're going to talk about balconies in the city center district. I believe Mr. Tangieri can walk us through this.
Yes, thanks. It's a pretty succinct one overall. So when we were looking at the PUD at 150 North Main recently, there was some discomfort with the fact that balconies are allowed to protrude into the right-of-way. And they have to meet Chapter 66 of the City Code, but Chapter 66 doesn't really include anything that specifically deals with balconies, so there's not really much to go on in Chapter 66. Basically, the building director kind of gets this approval authority if it meets the building code. So there's 3 items that govern balconies. One is balconies shall not extend more than 6 feet from the building face. 2 is materials shall be compatible with the building and be integrally designed. And then C3 is balconies shall not extend into a public right-of-way without approval of building director and meeting Chapter 66 of the City Code. That's sick. There's no definite article in front of building director. It just says of building director. So in order to not permit them to go into a public right-of-way, you would just take off the second half of that last item. It would just say balconies shall not extend into a public right-of-way. Certainly open to discussion, but it's about as straightforward as text amendments get.
Perfect, what I was looking for and exactly what I want. And anybody have any questions, qualms, any changes?
I just, for discussion purposes,
Sure.
wonder if there's value in having, like them I don't know the right language, but like the receded balcony that has a setback in particular areas, well, maybe even altogether. I think that's pretty uniform in most other cities I've seen. If they have a balcony, it's kind of set back into the building.
It's a fairly common way to do it. I mean, if it's not going into the right-of-way, I'm not sure we necessarily need to worry about it, but, I mean, I'm certainly open to hearing what other members of the planning commission think.
Me personally, I lived in apartments in college, and one of my neighbors would always be dumping like her child's water table off her balcony, or just things like that to kind of prevent those opportunities for that to become a nuisance issue, especially in city center. I don't know if.
But you're happy with it?
I mean, I'm happy, yeah, overall, yes.
Okay, then I would seek a motion to amend this, what do we want to call it? This
So-
ordinance. Make the amendment of killing C and replace it with balconies shall not exceed into a public right-of-way.
No, do we need to move this to council?
I think we have to.
You need
have
a public hearing
need a
first
public
here.
hearing, yeah, so-
You'd be able to notice for the first meeting in July, which is July 9th, I believe. Yeah, July 9th.
So we approve it tonight, and then we set a meeting, and then we have a public meeting here, and then it goes on to mayor and council. They have to have a public hearing. So this is a ways out before we get it into the actual ordinance.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve the language presented and set a public hearing for July 9th.
That's good enough.
Support.
Support? Any other comments? May I have roll call, please?
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer,
Yes.
Mr. Kucera,
Yes.
Mr. Nuchai,
Yes.
and Ms. Rutland.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That went well. Okay, agenda item number 8 is zoning ordinance amendment discussion for public hearing signage.
A little more to talk about on this one.
Yeah.
So basically, we're talking about doing what a lot of communities do, which is require that signage be posted at a property that is going to be subject to a public hearing. So you have special land use requests, you have rezoning requests, you have plan unit developments, you have zoning board of appeals requests. All of those things require a public hearing. And what this would do is require that a sign be posted on the property during that required noticing period. And there's a couple different ways to handle this. One is that you can require that the person who is the applicant create a sign that has a certain required information and post that on their property. And the other, which is what Berkeley and Birmingham, just offhand, among the many communities around us that do this, do, is you can provide a sign that has kind of that drives people to a page on your website where the application is available for review. There are certainly advantages to the latter approach. One is if it's 15 days before the meeting and you go to the property and the person has made the sign themselves and the sign is inadequate, you're now 15 days out from the meeting and they're not meeting a requirement, and that's a problem. And the other advantage to that is just that people get all the information when they go to the website. It's all there. And one thing that these signs don't do, there's a phone number for questions. They don't note that you can also review the application at City Hall. So that's something that I would recommend adding to the sign if we were to be the ones providing the sign, is add a little note that says the application can also be viewed at City Hall, because not everybody necessarily has great internet or is particularly internet savvy. Someone might get to the website and go, I don't know what to click on. So giving them that alternative, which already exists anyway, and just making them aware of it, I think would be advisable. and the actual text of the sign.
What
But
would-
that's obviously something that we can.
What would be
control.
provided to them at City Hall? Did come in here and look at the plans on a computer then,
Either on a computer or a physical copy of the plans, if they really needed to look at a physical copy.
I think if they were that interested in something, they'd probably come in and talk to the building department, right?
Yeah,
Get
exactly.
some hands-on,
Yeah.
yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, it's pretty rare because most people are able to go online and look at things, but, there just might be circumstances in which it's not possible for someone to do that effectively. So you want to point out that there are multiple ways to do this. You can do it online or you can do it at City Hall. And all of our notice language that goes in the paper says that to begin with. So it's information that everyone else is getting. It might as well be on the sign.
So when the newspaper, it has a link for where you can view it?
It does, yeah.
Okay. I mean, I like the city signs because I believe it's probably more uniform and
Definitely.
cost saving in terms of, because I've seen certain cities where it's part of the application fee and the city comes out and maintains the sign and does that. But having something that just is kind of basic, that goes everywhere, but
Right.
you can know where to find the information. Is our IT department able to have that information readily, like, linkable?
Yeah, I mean, Nick can address that because he's pretty much already doing it.
So I didn't want to get too far ahead of the game, but I think you all made great points tonight. I think this is going to be a great addition. And I think having a uniform sign that the city has will just add some more understanding by the community. So if you see this sign, you know that this site is having a public hearing on a variance, special land use, or another public hearing by the Planning Commission. And so obviously, depending on how the rest of the conversation goes, and I didn't want to get too far out of the game, I was going to have like a draft rendering of what the sign would look like. And I mean, it would basically be taking like a mixture of what Birmingham and Berkeley have, but just Clausenizing it basically. So we'd have the website, phone number. I think having the QR code is really nice too, because if you have neighbors walking in the neighborhood or downtown, if they want to snap a picture of it, it makes it very accessible. And like all plans, we have the hard copies available at City Hall. So again, depending on how rest of this conversation goes, the next step would be to schedule a public hearing. And at that time, I would hope to have some type of rendering of what the sign would look like at that time.
In terms of the internet, Nick, I know that we have someone new. Is there, I've gone to Birmingham's page and it's really user-friendly, like, here's all our public notices. Are we capable of doing that at this point?
Absolutely. And that's
Okay.
something we're working on rolling out too. We just don't want to prematurely put it out there until it's ready to go. And that way I would like to also just sidebar all site plans as well that don't have public hearings, but that way people know exactly where to go for anything development-wise where they can view plans.
Okay, yeah.
So that would be included.
You think you could have something ready in 2 weeks so we could put this on our next agenda for public
It
discussion?
would be the July 9th would be the first
Yeah.
time we could notice for. So,
July 9th?
Yeah.
So I'm confident we could get a rendering of a sign by then. And not that that's necessarily what this board's approving, but just so you're aware of what that would look like
Right.
as we get down the road.
Yeah.
How big of a sign are we talking about?
Just your typical political yard sign. I think they're usually 3x4. So that would be it.
Okay.
Enough to draw your attention.
Right. But nothing that goes outside of any of our sign
No.
ordinances?
We would be sure not to conflict with any of our sign ordinances.
Yeah, so one thing I noted in the language is item C says the sign shall not be counted toward the amount of signage otherwise permitted on the site by the Clausen sign ordinance.
Right.
So when this is up, they get their usual signage too. They don't have to take something down or worry about that. And basically, if you look at the language on page 2, take that paragraph at the bottom and replace item A with the 1, 2, 3, 4 below it with that paragraph at the bottom. So we're providing the sign, that's the paragraph you use. If they were going to be providing the sign, you'd use the paragraph up top. And then B and C stay no matter what. So, we're trying to consider the community we're in with item B there. The sign shall not be placed in the corner clearance area and may be mounted on posts or rigid wires, or where there's not available land to mount the sign on posts, mounted on a street-facing building wall. So like, for instance, the site plan we looked at the last meeting, that's a building that takes up the entire lot. There's no place to stick a sign in the ground, so we've got to allow them some sort of ability to put it on the wall so that people are going to be able to see it. And we just require that to be on the street-facing side, so it's going to be in the most visible place.
Where's the motivation? Like, remove the day after the hearing. I've seen most, maybe not most, but a lot of cities will keep the sign up through site plan approval. Is there a reason why? Because a lot of
Yes.
times, it's not until after the public hearing that a lot of the public actually finds out about things. It might be, in my opinion, helpful to have it up so we have somewhere to point citizens, or citizens can go to the site, use a QR after that public hearing if they want to opine on, especially a PUD.
Right. There's so the cities around us that do this, most of them have the removal the day after requirement. So that's really where that came from. I think partly it's about getting your sign back, but also, for instance, like with ZBA approval, I mean, it happens at the meeting. I think the one thing on here is the PUD, because the PUD kind of keeps going after the public hearing occurs, because then it goes to council. So maybe we would want to do a carve out for that, but most of these other things, there's a public hearing and then action gets taken and it's over. It's gone to the building department now and other places, but
So wouldn't it be covered then if we changed that language to after approval or denial? Because, with the ZBA, that would be that approval. And
you could generalize the language like that, yeah, after approval or denial, and then for planned unit development, it would be city council has final approval or denial, so. it
So that would
stay
kinda
up
cover
through their
everything.
meeting. I could see that. I mean, I think that makes sense.
And
Here, wait.
so we would put it in after the motion for a public hearing. The sign would go in, like, essentially when we make the motion, like today, right? That would mean the city would go and put in a sign, and then it would be up at that point in time?
That's what, another thing to clarify, just on that point. It sounds like the applicant, Joe, the applicant's going to get a sign from the city that they are in
Yes.
charge of posting.
They have to post it.
So
yeah.
not a city employee that would go out.
Okay.
But to her point, timeframe, it just says minimum 15 days.
It's minimum
Elaborate.
15 days prior to the date. That's the statutory noticing period. So that's really the minimum that we want to establish. As far as putting it out earlier than that, I mean, anything we do is going to be kind of arbitrary. I like mirroring the statute for that reason.
Is there a minimum amount of time when when the city sends out letters?
15 days. That's
15 days on that
that's
also?
The state law sets out the 15-day
But that's like a
requirement.
300-foot.
Yeah, so that
Radius
goes
of
out,
building.
that's got to go out 15 days in advance, and then the publication in the newspaper has to be a minimum of 15 days in advance
So
as well.
that kind of works, but I see this working better because I think, let's use the PUD as an example here, that I was notified by mail because I live across the street from it.
Sure, sure.
And so were 2 or 3 other houses. But the majority of the public didn't know anything was going on at the time. So I think, yeah, if we had a sign stuck up there right away that for 15 days at least, let people know, hey, something's coming here, something's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, ultimately,
Yeah.
is it's just a more general advertisement to the world that this site is under review.
Yeah, we don't want residents finding out after the fact, after all things taken care of, that they have no control at that point.
Right. And on that note, what is the enforcement mechanism that we'll have? I mean, is there anybody that would be kind of watching to see that it's up, 2 weeks before?
Yeah, I mean, I think at a minimum, on the day it's required to be posted, someone from the city would be checking on that. And then, I guess it depends a little bit on where it is, because if it's down like Batter, you kind of have to go there to check on it. But if it's somewhere downtown, you're probably going to drive past it anyway. But you can just make sure it's still there. It's funny, the one I included in here, it was down the street from my office, and I knew it was there, so I was like, oh, I go take a photo of that and put it in the memo. It happened to be lying in the dirt at the time I took the photo of it. But that's another thing that you can do just on a kind of, as your code enforcement people drive around, and they're always going around the city, you could just they could just have the address and just make sure the sign is still there. And if it's gone, they could stop and like look in the dirt and make sure it hasn't blown over or something, and just stand it back up if it has.
Well, yeah, these are that one, those kind of signs break pretty easily with that wire.
Yeah.
Especially if they're being reused over and over and over again.
Yeah, you're gonna have to order a surplus of the signs, because they are gonna get faded. They're gonna get beat up. You're just gonna have to have a good supply of them around, and eventually you're gonna have to replace them. It's just, it's not a particularly high capital outlay or anything, but it is an ongoing expense. You just got to keep your sign
But I've seen
inventory up.
Troy use like the sandwich boards that are more, I guess, durable.
Yeah, they may. I don't know offhand, but yeah, they might do that. Obviously, that's a higher cost up front, but it might be a higher cost up front in exchange for less incidental costs down the road.
Well,
so.
especially ensuring that it's withstanding weather, wind, and things, snow, whatever it may be. And is there value in having, just getting right to the point, and after we make the motion for a public hearing, that triggers admin to go place that sign, and that be a prerequisite of like, signing up for site plan approval, you're adhering and knowing, that developer is knowing that this sign will be placed on their property, after the motion of a public hearing, and admin goes there, places it, instead of sending someone out there to make sure it's there and back if it's not, and then it fell over. And I mean, is there a mechanism that we can just say, you agree that this sign will be posted on your property, at the time of a
Well, I
public
think
hearing?
that's as simple as adding a checkbox to the application, right, Nick? And then as far as administratively, like, maybe just, yeah. As far as administratively, is someone going to place the sign like a problem? Is that?
No, I mean,
Okay.
we're
I
out
don't wanna
driving around all the
speak
time
for-
anyway. And I think since this will be something new that we're doing, I think to start off maybe with this political style of yard sign and see how it works. Because the type of sign that we have doesn't necessarily matter. If we get, 6 months down the road and we've noticed that our yard signs have been stolen, wind has affected them, we can just purchase like a more durable A-frame type sign instead. But no, I imagine working with the applicant and ensuring that they know it has to be out there 15 days before, driving by daily if necessary to make sure it's still there. And then, at the end, when they get the sign, they'll acknowledge it. It's their responsibility to ensure the sign is there. And if it is stolen, broken, whatever it may be, they'll be liable for replacing that sign.
Yeah, just another box they're going to check on their application.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Does-
they should probably also be reporting that it's.
Yeah. Does that answer your?
I mean, yes, I kind of like the sandwich idea better, because it's just, and administration going there to put it there, because then we don't have any discretion on, oh, well, that sign wasn't very visible and he kind of turned it to the
Between two
side.
bushes.
It's just there, and it's a specific size, and it's not getting, messed with, because I can just see these kinds of signs all of a sudden, well, it was turned the wrong way, or I just like the idea, I guess, of a durable sandwich sign. I think that it will withstand much more use. It'll actually draw attention, because I actually think that a lot of these political signs, people might just drive by and think, oh, it's another Mavericks thing or soccer thing, or I would like something that kind of stands apart, that is durable. I don't know if everybody else feels the same way, but that's my
Go with,
thoughts.
neon or one of those blow.
I mean, it doesn't, yeah, the inflatable.
Now, that is in
Yeah.
violation of the sign ordinance. Get a feather banner, as we tell everyone to take those down.
We ban them all over town, then we go out and put them up,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Joe, does the other communities have the ordinances to this detail level? Because I'm on the other point, we don't want to complexionate it either, right?
Yeah,
So you
I
have a
mean-
basic ordinance saying you shall, and then it'll be up to the administration to determine the best approach to it.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, their ordinances are about the same amount of text I've got here. There's not, I mean, a few of the communities that are like bigger and have larger lots where the sign is gonna be like 30 feet from the road, have somewhat more elaborate provisions because they need to ensure more visibility, and the signs tend to be a lot larger. But no, this is a fairly normal amount of text here, and you know, when you put it in the hands of the administration, it takes some of the guesswork out of it. One thing Berkeley does is you can't put signs in the right of way. You know, if you've got signs in your yard, they've got to be in your yard. They can't be on the other side of the sidewalk. Berkeley puts these signs in the planting strip, so they're the only signs in the planting strip. That actually does help a little bit in terms of their visibility, and you notice them when you're walking. There's a house, you know, like 5 blocks from me right now that's up for a variance, and we walked past it the other day, and it was like, oh, okay, let's see what the variance is, and we hit the QR code, and yeah, I mean, I think having administration plant it is. I didn't want to speak for administration, but I'm hearing from Nick that it's no problem, and I think having them planted is sensible, because then you've got control and you know where it's going to be and what direction it's going to be facing and all that.
This agenda item is listed as a public hearing signage. This should be open to public tonight,
No, it's for the public hearing would be on the 9th of July if you set the
July
hearing
9th,
tonight.
same as the previous one, the balconies, okay.
Yeah.
Then I entertain a motion to make this amendment.
Well, I guess I'm kind of stuck on the material of the sign. Because this doesn't specify the type of sign, correct, Joe?
It does not. And, you know, I mean, again, I'll defer to administration on that as far as how that might be handled. But I haven't seen that specified in other ordinances either, so.
Well, I guess,
I've seen it in a few places, like in Troy, if
Yeah.
they're working on a large area and they fence it off, like our Burger King, it's all fenced off now with the black tarp over it. I've seen cities putting banners on that. A big banner says coming soon, whatever business is coming in there, but that's pretty much after the fact. They're already okay to do that.
Troy has a sandwich sign right now at there's a Chinese restaurant that's looking for a change of use. And I drove by it recently. I think it's on Long Lake. But it's not a huge lot, but it's durable. It's there. It's not getting blown over or knocked over or taken by wind or rain, or I just see a lot of these just failing a lot.
So you're looking for more visibility on it.
More, well,
I mean,
more visibility and the durability of it. I mean, I use those political signs for like different things, and yeah, you can use them a handful of times, and then the metal's breaking because it's been pushed in the ground so many times, and the wire's falling apart.
I think there's a disadvantage to being too prescriptive in the ordinance as to what kind of sign it is, because if the city is providing it, it can make an adjustment if what it's using isn't working. But if you're prescriptive in the ordinance, then the city has to change the ordinance if it needs to change the sign type. So if we said sandwich board in the ordinance, and for some reason that wasn't working out and we needed to change the approach that we were taking, then we would have to amend the ordinance to change the approach. We couldn't just change it because it's not working and we need to try something else. So I think that there's an advantage to just letting the administration kind of figure it out as it goes along. I think Nick wants to say something, but
Yeah, and we obviously just wouldn't get one of these because we're gonna, at some point, have more than one plan, more than one public hearing. And in some of our larger lots, like Burger King, it's on a corner. We wouldn't just put one sign out there. You put it on both corners. If it's a longer, wider lot, we'd put more than one sign there. And so the point is to make the public aware, and that's what we're gonna do with this
Yeah, we're
here.
going to need a half dozen or a dozen of these.
Certainly.
Well, with that said, Nick, there's other ordinance that do require if it faces more than one road but we don't have that mechanism in our ordinance, and I would hate for a developer to think like they're being unfair because I've got two and the other guy only has one, so don't you think that that should be included on, other cities definitely include that language in their ordinance. I've got Troy and Sterling Heights in front of me. I guess, I'm sorry if you guys are playing musical chairs, but Joe, is that something that we would want that in the ordinance if we're going to add more than one sign on larger sites or sites that face, let's say, Main Street and 14 Mile?
yeah, I mean, there are a number of ways to handle that. I mean, one is just to use administrative discretion. I mean, and as long as you've got a rationale for what you're doing, you're gonna be fine.
Wait, a rationale written in the ordinance?
It doesn't have to be written in the ordinance. If you're going out there to put the signs out and you've got a corner lot and you put a sign on one street and a sign on another.
I would
you're-
think
you're
we'd
doing
want
it
that
for
in an
that-
ordinance,
for,
Joe. Just because I've seen how things have happened in the past, and if it's not in an ordinance, it's not happening, or we don't have rights to have a rationale. It becomes a showing favoritism thing. I mean, I can share language from Sterling Heights says, if a property has frontage on two major streets, two signs will be required to be erected. I mean, it's pretty basic, right?
Yeah, that's. Although I wouldn't say two streets, because you might have something that has frontage on three streets, so. I would say if a property has frontage on multiple streets, a sign for each street.
Okay.
So if we're changing language too, just that paragraph that you suggested still has the applicant in charge of posting it, so you'll just change that as well, Joe?
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
I think. I'm just thinking out loud here. I think city shall post and applicant shall maintain is probably the language you'd want there.
Yeah.
Would someone like to make a motion to approve the amendment with changes, and knowing that it's going to come, and we also have to have a public hearing on it? And it will come back with the changes. We can review it at that meeting.
Yeah, Joe, did you change the timing of that in your notes? I'm not sure if you noted that.
I haven't heard any kind of final consensus on that. I prefer 15 days because that's the statutory
Oh, no,
requirement.
I'm sorry, Joe. I agree with that.
Okay.
I meant until it's been
Oh,
approved.
yes, until
approval.
the day after approval or denial is what I have right now.
Okay, is that amenable to everybody, or, yeah?
Or sorry, final approval or denial.
The final approval.
Yeah.
Okay,
Because that way also, if you have a hearing and you postpone a decision, then final approval or denial is going to be at a later meeting, so it will stay up until the later meeting.
which I think makes sense. Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the language as amended with, do you want, I don't feel like I have to detail those. You've got those, right, Joe?
Yeah.
And
we know what you mean.
set a public hearing for, we're going to do July 9th as well
July 9th.
for our signage.
Yep.
Correct.
Support.
Support. Any further discussions? Seeing none, I'll take roll call, please.
And real quick, Mr. Cusera, I know you made a comment about, on the packet, it said public hearing signage. And it was public hearing signage because that's what the agenda item was, not that it was a public hearing. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay.
Mr. Tinlin,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer,
Yes.
Mr. Cusera,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai,
Yes.
Ms. Redmond,
Yes.
and Mr. Solomon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And move on to agenda item number 9, which is the discussion of the draft master plan modules.
Yeah, I gave you another small piece this time. We had some discussion about statistics last time, and I am working on pulling together some more stuff. But I just didn't have it ready for this meeting. So if I couldn't get it in the packet, then I didn't want to spring it on everybody without everybody having a chance to look at it first. So this is the last portion of the infrastructure. We looked at the rest of it last time. So this deals with utilities and stormwater management. And it's heavily reflective of a conversation that we began back in the fall, where we're really talking about ways that we can relieve pressure from our stormwater management system, because we have a lot of pipes in the ground. We have a lot of pipes in the ground that were put in the ground a very long time ago. As is noted in the text, the world in which that system was designed is not the world we live in now. We have a very different stormwater profile as a region than we did back in the 50s. The statistics, when you start getting into them, they're a little startling. Total annual precipitation in southeast Michigan increased by 44% from 1951 through 2014. So you can imagine someone developing a stormwater management system back in 1951, and they're basing that on historical data. They're saying, well, this is what a 100-year storm is, this is what a 50-year storm is, this is what a 10-year storm is, and they're trying to account for that in their design. Well, here we are 70 years later, and we have a lot more rain and much bigger storms than they had back then on a much more frequent basis. One of the craziest statistics in here is a projection from SEMCOG that by mid-century, the rainfall volume for a 10-year storm, that's a storm with a 10% chance of occurring in a given year, so pretty high chance of occurring in a given year, will increase by 67%. That's by around 2050. And by the end of the century, that's going to increase by 138%. So a big storm that could occur with a 10% chance of occurring in a given year is going to be a lot bigger, more than twice as big as it is now by the end of the century. So, yeah, we can, as we replace our sewer mains, we can make the pipes bigger, but we have to have other strategies that we're using to take pressure off of those pipes during a major storm event. Because, you know, I mean, these, of course, are projections. They may be overblown. They may be, you know, less than what's actually going to happen. It might be 150%. We don't really know for sure, but we're trying to work with the numbers that we've got and project out into the future. And we know no matter what happens, heavy storms are going to be a much more regular event. And it's just a matter of degree, essentially. So we have to have a lot of ways to manage stormwater. We have to be thinking about it from a lot of different angles. Some things to note. So 2 ways to handle increased volumes of water. First is to increase the ability of the storm sewers to handle the increase in flow to the system during a storm. That means not necessarily just bigger pipes. That might also mean more points of entry to the pipes as well. So you might wind up having more catch basins and things ultimately if you've got these larger storms that are kind of becoming your norm, which requires a somewhat different approach to designing your system than the one that we've used in the past, right? Because we kind of had a standard for spacing of catch basins and things, and that goes for both public infrastructure where you're actually designing your sewer main and its intakes, and also for private infrastructure where you're designing a parking lot and you've got a certain number of places where water can flow into the stormwater management system. You may ultimately need to have more of those places just so that the volume doesn't back up at the few that are available, right? Enlarging pipes or separating the storm system from the sanitary system, which is you want to talk about capital intensive projects. That would be a hugely capital intensive project, and it has to happen from the outside in. So if you've got some of the system that goes into Birmingham is further into the system than what's in Clawson. So you'd have to separate the system there, then separate it here so that you don't have combined flow flowing into a separated system. And then you get down to Detroit where they've got that. Port Huron has actually done, using some grants, a substantial amount of separation of its old combined system. It's one of the few cities in the country that's been able to do a lot of its system. But it's an incredibly capital intensive thing to do. I think long term, it's a wise thing to do, but it needs to be coordinated regionally. It's not something we as a city could get a bunch of money and decide to do. So it's mentioned in there, but we don't have a great deal of control over it, so it's not something that we can count on. Let's put it that way. We can advocate for it, but we can't count on it. Also, greater capacity upstream doesn't do any good if it runs into constrained capacity downstream. So there's that regional thinking that needs to happen. The other way to handle increased stormwater is to prevent or delay water from flowing into the system. A lot of ways to do that. Permeable ground surfaces, of course, allow stormwater to go directly into the ground. Ultimately, they enter the natural groundwater system. Impervious surfaces, that includes paved areas, heavily compacted ground, buildings, streets, that's going to catch water and has to direct it ultimately into the wastewater system. So a note about permeable surfaces. In general, permeable surfaces are those that are not covered with some sort of impervious material. But stormwater doesn't uniformly infiltrate all permeable surfaces. So some soil types absorb water more readily than others, and the degree of compaction in the soil also matters. So we're fully developed. We have lots of non-residential uses and we have lots of subdivisions. Much of the land in the subdivisions is yards and other areas that aren't covered with impervious surfaces, but very little of it is truly undisturbed land. So some of it is, but not a lot of it. So fill dirt, clay, and other materials that have been added to the land over time, plus the compaction from construction activity, have kind of changed the natural soil conditions of the city's neighborhoods. And the net effect of that is a decrease in the overall permeability of those places. They're still permeable surfaces, but they're not going to be as permeable as they were when it was just virgin land that had never been touched, never been stirred up, never had anything built on it, never had construction equipment cross it. So that's something that we have to keep in mind, is that ground is going to suck up water, but it's going to suck it up unevenly, and it's going to suck it up at a lower rate than it would have in its natural state.
Joe, can I ask a couple of questions?
Sure, sure.
One, are we expanding our pipes to be bigger than other cities?
That would be a question for the engineer. I don't know offhand exactly how we're handling that. But
Isn't
I
there
could
the
ask.
potential that that'll just bring more into our systems and kind of make us kind of take more of Birmingham's if it's raining hard, if we're expanding things? Maybe I'm not an engineer, but like,
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Nick.
So I was going to touch on this a little bit in the staff report, and so I'll provide more detail later. But the city council a few weeks ago approved a CCTV program, which is closed camera inspection of the city sewer system, and that hasn't been done since 2008. And so there's been a lot change, as Joe was alluding to, with how stormwater affects our system. And so once that's completed, which we're hoping that's done by this fall, we're waiting on the county to approve our permits and applications, and then we'll be able to accept bids for that. That's going to be able to let us know what we can do with our sewers to, clean them. Because a lot of the times, if tree roots get in there, that really restricts flow. And so, not an engineer either, but I would agree that if we expand our own sewer system, Clawson Small, are we just going to end up taking more of Royal Oaks and Madison Heights? Or I guess not Madison Heights, but I agree with what you're saying. And so, can't speak on that right now, but we're at least inspecting them in compliance with the master plan language and stuff. So
okay.
If you get more, it'll be from Birmingham and Troy because they're upstream. But the thing is, those communities are working pretty hard to do a lot more detention and retention in their own communities. So hopefully the cumulative effect will be that everybody's kind of doing their part. And I just mentioned detention and retention. The difference between those two things is that a retention device, which is usually a pond, is designed to permanently hold water and generally not designed to release it into the sewer system under normal conditions. Under extraordinary conditions, typically there's an overflow plan that will allow it to go to the storm system so that it doesn't simply expand.
Can I ask my other question with that?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Clawson was mostly wetlands, right? From what
Yes,
I
just
and
like
I've-
Berkeley, yeah.
Right, and from what I've heard, like even Strom used to be just where people caught frogs, and I didn't live here at the time, but
Yeah.
so I know a lot of other cities like West Bloomfield will have an offset. Like if you're displacing a wetland, you have
Right.
a certain amount of like you said, or is that retention or detention? Detention.
Retention holds the water permanently,
Retention.
more or
Okay.
less, and then detention is designed to hold it temporarily and slowly release it.
Okay, so like I do think that having a retention basis for some of our newer developments would be very helpful since we are built on wetland and there's none of that has happened as of yet, correct? I mean, we kind of just rely on, there's green space and hopefully that takes some of
The
it.
only retention pond I believe we have is up at the Westgate Center there behind
Yes, there is
Liberty
one
Mall
back
there.
there.
There is a big
Oh, is there?
I think
pond area back
there
there.
might be one or two up in that Crooks corridor.
That's the only one that I'm aware of is.
Yeah. Just the one? Okay.
And
Yeah.
if we did, would we need an engineer to get a topographical idea of like what's our low-lying areas?
Well, we already have that.
Oh, we do?
We definitely have a deep understanding of our topographical situation. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is adding facilities under new development, or if a parking lot gets rebuilt, like the one over here has detention now underneath it. It never did before. There have been a few of those recently. There will be more. The ACE project is a great example. That the old ACE parking lot had no detention underneath it. There was nothing. And there was a little pipe that ran through the middle of the parking lot with a couple catch basins, and it all went out to the sewer. And now there's a huge detention system under that parking lot, and that site holds water for days after a storm, and it just trickles into the system. That takes a lot of strain off the system relative to what that site used to do. And there's still the same exact amount of pavement and impervious surface on the site. Let's see, where was I going from there? I've included a bunch of, stormwater management methods that, some of which are, very commonly done right now, and then some of which are, not really all that common. Underground detention is the first one. That's widely used. That's the kind of thing that typically happens on a site-by-site basis. Are there, potentially ways that you could pull together capital to speed up that process? You have to get agreements with private property owners, most of whom are probably not going to want their parking lots torn up if they can help it. But it's a possibility that you may be able to get some of that. Be proactive about some of that. But for the most part, you're kind of relying on redevelopment to bring that into the community on a site-by-site basis, and you hope that over time you get a lot of it and it helps the situation, basically. Any little bit helps, but obviously more is better. And Clawson does currently follow Oakland County standards for the amount of detention that's required. Oakland County just last year released a much more stringent set of stormwater management standards than they had previously. And it's been an adjustment for developers because they got used to a certain regime and now they're having to do a lot more. But the county requirements are a lot more stringent than they used to be. The city could always consider having its own engineering standards and exceeding county requirements. You want to be careful about what that means in terms of hampering redevelopment and new development of sites. Just because there's a certain point where it gets very, very, very expensive. It's already very expensive to begin with, but there is a sensitivity that needs to come into it there. But ultimately, I think the new stormwater standards are a huge step in the right direction as far as managing stormwater, especially in a community like ours where we're built out. And we kind of got to take our opportunities wherever we can get them.
Can't we do more in terms of retention, though, is where I was kind of, like, there's a lot more we can do in terms of if we're requiring certain landscape in parking lots, we can kind of include, like, the swells, or is that?
Well,
what-
yeah, and that's the kind of the rest of the chapter goes is, I talk a little bit about filtration, which is important for most of these types of systems. But rain gardens and bioretention is number 3, and that is something that we could start looking at more heavily. And there are a lot of different ways to approach this, but so a rain garden in general, it's a depressed area that's designed to collect rainwater. You plant typically native perennials and shrubs and things in there because they'll suck up a lot of water and they will filter the water. And then it stays there as it infiltrates into the ground below. So they can require significant excavation if the surface soils are heavy fills and clays and other less permeable material, which we know we have a lot of. And they can be incorporated into curb extensions and things. They don't have to be as big as the one in the picture there. They can be, Royal Oak actually has some very nice examples of them on South Main, right down by Holiday Market and Jim Brady's and all that. There are a number of places where the curb is open and water can flow into these rain gardens. And that helps to keep some of that water out of the sewer pipes.
And those are retention, those don't connect at all?
Well, they're detention by definition because the water does filter out of them. It's just it doesn't filter into the sewer, it filters into the ground.
Okay.
So it is, strictly speaking, it's detention.
And is there a way that you have to build that ground that?
There
that-
is, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's you typically have layers. There's usually layers of gravel of different sizes. There's soil. There's one of my landscape architects could explain it a lot better than I could. But yes, there are. There's kind of a lasagna of different layers that go into the ground there and allow the filtration and the infiltration. So that's something that we could be looking at. And there are opportunities just from a municipal standpoint to, you might be able to find a local group that's willing to help work with you financially and in terms of labor to help do a demonstration in Clausen Park or something, so that you could kind of show the community, like, here's what this is, here's how it works. And then when a developer comes in and wants to do something on a site and we're asking for one of these in a corner of the site, you can just point them to the demonstration project and say, this is what you should be expecting to build. Brighton has one and it's downtown. It's an island in a public parking lot. I don't know how well you know downtown Brighton, but there's the mill pond, and then to the east of the mill pond, there's a church on the hill. To the east of that, there's a big traffic or a parking lot island, and that is a rain garden. And that was their demonstration project. We're not in the same watershed, but the River Rouge Conservancy does demonstration rain gardens throughout its territory in the River Rouge watershed. So it's a matter of kind of looking around and seeing if there's anybody in our watershed that's doing this that we could maybe partner with, or if there's some sort of grant money or something that we could get to make it happen. But you could turn a significant corner of the park into a detention system that would help that immediate area and also provide an attractive demonstration project. The next one is something that people can do on their own, rainwater capture. Rainwater capture works at a number of different scales. The most common that you'll see is rain barrels. I have 2 behind my garage. Several of my neighbors have them as well. So you're catching rainwater and then you're using it for something later. We use it to water our garden. Larger systems, though, can be integrated into usually commercial buildings, but really any kind of building. You could even integrate it into a house if you were so inclined. And they provide water to systems that don't need potable water. So like an irrigation system or toilets even in some buildings, you could use that water to, obviously with filtration, you don't want to just send everything out, but you can use that water to do those things. You're taking less water from your water system in that case, and you're keeping that water during a storm event from soaking into the ground or running off the property and going straight into the sewer. Gray water systems are a little bit different in that they're capturing the wastewater that's produced by the occupants of a building for reuse before it's sent into the sewer system. So those systems, they can be extremely elaborate, they can be very simple. It's filtered and stored in a tank. The effluent and things goes out to the sewer system, but the water that's filtered is kept in the system, and then it can be used for dirtier applications like the ones I just mentioned, toilets, irrigation, that kind of thing. Green roofs are another way to hold water. They'll hold water on the roof of a building. It'd otherwise be directed immediately to the ground into the sewer system through the gutters and downspouts. You know, in some cases, like if your green roof is overflowing, it's going to go down. But they weigh a lot, so and you have to account for their weight when they're wet. So they do require substantial reinforcement of the structure, so they're pretty expensive. There are a lot of examples in the area. The one that I put in there is over in St. Joe. It's the roof of a dumpster enclosure. So it's not a ton of square footage, but it's a nice demonstration. Innovation Hills up in Rochester Hills, the park there has a pavilion with a green roof that was done as a demonstration project. If you want to go see one up close, they actually have a section of it that's down at viewing height. So you can actually look at the layers that they put in there. It's kind of cool. The Ford has a giant green roof at the River Rouge plant. That's a really good example of one that takes up, it's got to be acreage. The plant is so huge. But there's lots of examples of them. But again, they are extremely expensive systems. So there has to be some sort of, unless you have a person who's just that interested in it, you have to have some sort of incentive system to get someone to put one in, because otherwise it's probably not going to be worth it, especially with construction costs as they are. Bioswales are similar function to rain gardens. Usually they're designed to hold water as it moves to a destination rather than holding it in one place and allowing it to infiltrate. So a swale is generally going to direct water. And the advantage of a swale over, say, a buried pipe or something is that as it's directing the water, it's being filtered by the plant life that's living in the swale. And you do get some infiltration in the swale as well, so not all the water that gets into the swale is necessarily going to find its way into the pipes. Leaf litter, this is one of my favorites because it's something that you can do just by being lazy. If you just leave some leaf litter in your backyard, you can actually absorb a lot of the initial rainfall into that leaf litter. A few inches of leaf litter actually absorbs a ton of rainwater. So if you leave it kind of at the periphery of your yard, let's say you have a fence in your backyard and you leave a little bit of leaf litter, maybe like a foot of it, it can actually interdict water that's flowing across property lines pretty effectively, like shockingly effectively. So, you know, I mean, it kind of goes against everything we were all taught about yard maintenance when we were growing up. Oh, you got to get it all and you got to get it all to the curb. But it actually is kind of effective at slowing down the flow of water, preventing some flow from one property to another, and just holding some right there where the litter is left. And it's something that just anybody can do on their own property to make a small, admittedly very small contribution, but nevertheless, it's a contribution. And finally, tree canopy, because trees in their root systems do a lot to stabilize soils. They also consume large volumes of water from the soil, and that can help prevent soils from becoming as waterlogged as they otherwise would. Waterlogged soil is vulnerable to immediate discharge of any subsequent rainwater that falls on it. You have a very heavy storm that lasts 6 hours. For the first hour, maybe the lawn is soaking up everything that falls on it, but eventually it gets to the point where it can't absorb it all, and finally water's just flowing off of it because it's just piling up too fast. So the less waterlogged your soil is at the beginning of the storm, the better off you are in terms of managing the stormwater that falls on it in the next one. It's actually a big problem in the park near me over in Berkeley. There are like lots of huge bird baths in that park because it's not graded well, and it's waterlogged like half the summer usually. You have to get like 3 weeks without rain for all the water to go away. Because we've got all the same fill that Clawson does. Lots of clay. So there's a little bit of talk about implementation here for alternative stormwater management and maintaining our public wastewater infrastructure. I'll probably expand on that a little bit. Part of it is, Nick hinted at it before, camera work in our system to see what capacity we really have, right? Because the pipe is sized a certain way, but if half of that is silt, then its capacity is lower than we thought it was, right? So sending those cameras in there gives you a good idea of what you've got to do. And, if you've got to send a Vector truck around town to pull all that silt out of there, that will improve your situation a lot right off the bat. So that will be, done imminently. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that can be done. A lot of it's very small on an individual level, but the more of it that happens, and that's why I have an advocacy icon next to a lot of these, because it's things that we can talk about and encourage people to do. It's all a matter of making sure that everything is working toward the common goal of not having floods in the future, right? There's always limitations, we're part of a regional system on what we can do, but nevertheless, there's a lot we can do on our own, and I think that we just need to be trying to do all that we can on our own. And where we need those regional solutions, that's where we can turn to advocacy as part of the organization that makes up a larger water district. You can take your case to them and maybe bring your neighbors along with you.
And Joe, I think, I appreciate it. I think, you've showed us some of these ideas in the past, and it's like, for me, it's very informative and educational, but I would, like you said, want to get more specific with the implementation.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this is like the number 1 or number 2 issue for the city next to roads.
Right.
And I really want to think about, you kind of mentioned it earlier, how do you not put a burden on the developer, but how do we increase some of our standards to allow
Right.
and kind of force more green space or permeable surfaces? And I think even if we take the approach where, if it's developing a current green space, there's more restrictive things you have to do, whether increase green space requirements or you have to have permeable surfaces, not an option. A lot of times we have a section when we go through and look at site plans and we say suggestions for being more green, and I think most developers just toss that in the garbage and move on. So I'd like to be a little bit more, without being a burden on a developer. Like you said, we still want to develop this because I think there are really good things we've done with like the 100-year detentions and these new parking lots, as you mentioned. So I just would love to see us expand that section and really get into focused conversations around how do we revisit these ordinances and standards. And then the other piece that I just want to mention is I think this ties in closely with like the first goal of the sustainability plan.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how you envisioned fitting those together. I think you mentioned to yourself there's a lot of advocacy, right?
Right.
And we need to have support from the city level, whether it's the library,
Exactly.
the Hunter Center, be able to provide more education on a regular basis. I think people would want to do things like rain barrels, but don't really know how to go about it, right?
Exactly.
So I think if we try to, I know it's a plan, but I always feel like we're
Right.
never being specific enough.
Sure.
It's always just educational and like things to consider. So as much as we can kind of drive towards action items, that would be great, and I'm happy to work with you. I know we came up with a whole list of action items for sustainability plan, so maybe we can pull a
Right.
couple of those.
Yeah, and I've gone through that and kind of, like we talked about, kind of stratified and focused on the big ones first, and then the other ones have kind of gone into their own box where it's
Yeah.
like, all right, these are other things we can do, but these are the priorities.
Sure.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I do think that there is more ability with the planning commission seeing as how I know that there's mixed feelings on the CIP and the master plan and how we coordinate those, but like putting a vision forth for the city and how we can lead by example we can advocate by doing those things that you suggested at City Park, and we can advocate by making it more accessible in kind of being a leader in that, I think. So I would love to see, like you said, more implementation and more guided steps for us to use that as a mechanism to draw in the city's, taking action on these items. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, the sustainability plan sounds like it's going to live on. So a lot of times, I think everybody wants to do more, but we're all pulled in different directions, especially, with city employees and things. So maybe we can use an advocacy group to actually promote those action items, right? So just a way to tie that together.
Yeah, and obviously the master plan is a lot of conceptual stuff that we want to see implemented into the city. But as part of that, there are implementation items that we'll have in. So, I mean, just two that come into my head is the first one would be to implement a citywide rainwater capture program to where the city could provide the rain barrels to residents and, how-to guides. I think that would be a rather simple implementation item that could be put in the master plan. And one that might be a little more work and a little more funding that would have to go into it, but an implementation item could be develop a rain garden at one of our city parks, right?
Yeah.
And if I don't know who said it, but if we want to walk the walk, we better talk it as well and show that, if we're going to require developers to do something or people doing business in town, we should show that we're making the same effort. So I think those would be two simple-ish action items that we could put in there.
Yeah, I'd love that.
So is that kind of what you're looking for? Okay.
Yeah. Under the first item, the underground detention, these tanks, we're making that mandatory on buildings nowadays, right? That we somehow do a survey of how much ground they're covering and how much water they have to hold.
Yeah, there's a whole set of calculations.
But we're basically going by Oakland County's.
Right now, yeah, we use Oakland County standards. That's how the city's always done it. And like I said, Oakland County just updated its standards to a more stringent set of standards. There's a few kind of straggly rules that are still rolling in on that, but AEW, the city engineer, has been pretty on top of it.
So if Oakland County changes if they up their game, we automatically go along with that?
Exactly, yeah, because
Okay,
we've
that's-
adopted their standards by
Yeah.
reference, essentially.
That's good. And with rainwater sitting on things, like you said about the soils are very important, whether the rainwater soaks through it or not. I think it's been probably 2 or maybe 3 years that Mary Liz was Leon Lulu's. She owns the grassy lot behind Burger
Yep.
King site. And she was going to pave it for parking, and then she decided to put permeable pavement stones in and came back saying that doesn't work. If you put those in,
Yeah.
the soil is probably too much clay there. The water would just still stand. So I don't know where she ever got with that project.
Yeah, there have been problems with that really kind of throughout the lower Woodward corridor because there is so much fill. It was so swampy and so much clay and other garbage was brought in to fill it out that, yeah, you've had people who've tried to do like permeable pavers and it just sort of doesn't work because the water doesn't have anywhere to go once it gets through the pavers.
Kind of work to go and excavate a lot of soil and put in something that's going to absorb
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm good. You just looking for our discussion of this?
Yeah, it was just discussion tonight. If
Further?
you have anything.
Couple of comments.
Sure.
Wanted to echo maybe a similar sentiments expressed earlier about how this integrates with the sustainability plan.
Yeah.
I did like that sustainability plan's format, if you will, in terms of how it outlined, I'll call it action items and goals. So my question, I had a question on how this overlaps, because the last I understood that the sustainability plan was supposed to be a chapter, if you will, as part of this master plan.
Yep, so that's a chapter and this is a chapter. And what you're going to see in the implementation matrix that goes along with this stuff is there's going to be cross-references to the sustainability chapter because the flooding goal there overlaps with this. So rather than repeat the action item in both places, we'll be referring to where it shows up elsewhere in the plan.
Okay. Another question I had was, we're staring at this title of this is utilities and stormwater management as a module. I was curious on how this fits in. This doesn't resonate with any of the other list of modules that we were looking at in the past.
It's part of the overall infrastructure module.
So this is part
yeah.
of the infrastructure module.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, it's the end of it, basically, because we've got the roads in the previous part of it.
Right. And the only thing I'll also offer with respect to utilities and stormwater management is that what we're staring at is a large discussion over stormwater management and not a whole lot over utilities. And I acknowledge the fact that we don't have a whole lot of control over private utilities.
Sure.
But you've mentioned a number of times advocating for different things, and I think we could flesh out the discussion of utilities. The first thing that pops in my mind is electrical power, and DTE. But what can we advocate for, or is there something we can advocate for from a master plan perspective?
Sure. There's a couple different ways that can go too, because one is obviously DTE is responsible for power supply and grid management, so there's some shortcomings in the grid management system. I think we'd all agree. Consumers Energy is busy in Lansing right now asking for a lot more money for grid maintenance. So there's the grid level aspect of it, but there's also the kind of private development element of it as well, where alternative energy might be something that we can. It's addressed a bit in the sustainability plan already.
Yeah, I think there's an energy section.
There is an alternative energy section in there, but I guess we could probably kind of do a little bit of a cross reference here to that as well. But as far as how we address other things that we're not really talking about there, grid management would be one. You can't do community solar in Southeast Michigan either because of DTE's lobbying efforts. So that's another thing that could potentially go in the advocacy bucket, allowing for community solar in Southeast Michigan. That's kind of what we can do as far as that's concerned. But we can certainly add something about it.
Everybody happy? We don't need a motion on this because this is simply a discussion of
Right, yeah.
master plan. And I think Joe got enough information from us, right, to,
I'm good.
where does that come next? Does that go to public comment and then mayor and council? or-
That's where we're headed with the
we're going.
master plan, yeah. An open house before that, but I'm not going to be at your next meeting. Andy's going to take care of you. There's only one agenda item so far. But when I'm back in July, we should have a compiled thing to look at, and then we can make a decision on what we want to do about an open house, and after that, then moving forward with a comment period and public hearing.
Good. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item number 10, which is other business. Anybody have anything under other business?
Just wondering if we've gotten with council on the short-term rental workshop thing yet?
So, as I shared previously, the big ticket item for council was the budget. That's now approved, and then after that was the bond language, which I'll touch on in a moment, which they did approve to go on the November ballot. So now that both those items are gone, that's going to be a topic we'll probably discuss whether it's next meeting or July. So we'll probably have a special meeting or a joint workshop between both bodies sometime in July. And so, as part of the staff report, I guess I'll just bring it up now, are there certain dates and times that are typically available for the most of you? I think Tuesdays, most people are typically booked up if we did something before a council or planning commission meeting, or was there a desire to vet this and have it try and be a separate day and time?
I'm flexible.
I would prefer it to be like on a regular Tuesday. I don't like to leave my kids when I don't have to. But I have a hard time doing it on like a Monday, Wednesday kind of thing. But
And it's going to be one of those things that we're dealing with,
Lots of-
15, 20
Yeah.
different people's schedules. And so we'll give at least 2-week notice so we can try and make that work. But that's something we're going to be talking about very soon.
Did you say that it was too difficult to do before this meeting?
I'm just saying sometimes timing with people getting into work late. I mean,
I got you.
we'll talk about it.
That'd be my preference, was just
Get some feel
Tuesday.
from council on what they'd like to do, and yeah, so we'll be going on that very shortly.
Yeah, send out 4 or 5 dates and get a poll as to what the majority want to go with.
Maybe you could do like a doodle poll or something, or we'll get on that very soon.
Okay. Anything else under other business? How about planners report?
I have nothing further.
No planners report. Staff report and training opportunities.
Just to reiterate with the council bond language that they approved last Tuesday during their meeting. So the language that they approved for is going in front of the voters on the November 5th general election. And so it's a request of $64.5 million in funding that'll be directly allowed to be used on infrastructure improvements related to road, water, and sewer. And so the we're working on rolling out some educational components to notify the public of what exactly that is. And so hopefully you'll be seeing something online in the next week with more information on that. Additionally, the one other item that wasn't in the packet, because we were just trying to make sure the public noticing requirement was met, the one agenda item for next meeting, which is June 25th, is a rezoning application for 533 South Main Street. And so if you're not completely familiar with that site, it's about a 8-unit, 1-story apartment building that is on the north side of Gladwin, across the street from the Church of Clausen. And so that site is zoned BRD1, and their rezoning request is requesting it to become CMD. So that'll be in front of you next meeting. Additionally, in the staff report, there were some general updates. We've got a couple of projects that are having their engineering plans nearing completion. They've made modifications per AEW's review, and so hopefully we can get those engineering reviews completed by them, and we can get work started at a couple of those site plans that we've approved over the last few months. And the other item I wanted to mention, based on some comments last meeting regarding 288 West 14 Mile, that is Dee Dee's Fine Vintage. There was a consent judgment reached between the property owner and city council that was signed off by a judge. And so as part of that consent judgment, the property owner, and I'm just going to read through the items here, shall apply for a permit and install a French drain system to alleviate any potential flooding in the backyard parking lot of the property. That will be, and they have already pulled the permit for that item. They will be pulling the permit and painting the stripes for the parking lot to the rear of the site. They are required to post a bond in the amount of $10,000 to ensure that the site is in compliance with the consent judgment. When the property is transferred for commercial use, the owner shall submit a site plan for review and approval of the Clausen Planning Commission prior to occupancy. So that would be the next owner of the property, and that'll go on be added to the Oakland County Register of Deeds. And so once the items in the consent judgment are completed, she'll be able to apply for a certificate of occupancy for that site.
That's why I've been after this site for a 2-year period now. And because she's running a business, and I've mentioned this before, she's running a business for 2 years with no site plan approval. I wasn't sure what this consent judgment was. One thing they must have left off, because I'm quite sure the water line has to be replaced at that house, because it's now a piece of commercial property. It's not a residence anymore. And I think that was on our, back when Tribal Fair, we gave them a list of projects to do. They completed half the projects. They didn't complete the second half. If Dee Dee's would have come in here with the second half, we would have been done 2 years ago. And my feelings, I feel bad here. We're the planning commission. We're the board you come in front of in order to do business in the city of Clawson. And I kind of have the feeling we're being undermined here. I don't know. The judge told them that they can do this, they can do that. She's going to comply with the judge, and everything's going to be fine until she sells the building to somebody else, and the next person comes in and gets a site plan from us. That doesn't bode well with me. I was hoping Rennis would be here to explain the legality of it. I'm not trying to overstep our bounds, but I think we have that. I think we're in that position. You know, I'd hate to pretend I'm a business and I come into town, and if I can find a way to run a business for 2 years and then skirt the issue and go in front of a judge and get reprimanded and take care of it, then what do you need a planning commission for anymore? I mean, I think we have the authority, and then I felt we're being bypassed on it. I'd like a legal response from Rennis is what I'm really looking for.
I could talk with him and see if he's interested in coming to elaborate more on this. But again, the consent judgment is something agreed to by the property owner and the governing body of the municipality. And so that is what she needed to complete in order to be compliant to get occupancy.
I get their point of view, but I mean, at the same time, I think we're being overlooked on this issue.
I mean, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think that this specific site, as you know, has been a conversation from, I think it was back in 2019 is when this initiated. I mean, at that time, I believe it was just you and Ms. Redmond sitting on the planning commission at the time. So we've had a lot of turnover on this board, and there has been a significant amount of deliberation regarding that site from the previous owner to, what the use is now. And so she'll be in compliance with this. And when and if someone else occupies the site, they'll have to re-engage in the site plan process. And that's
not the outcome I was looking forward to, but okay, well, we'll see how it goes. I'll contact Rennis and see if I get more detail from him. Thanks.
all right.
Anything else on staff report and training?
Unless there's any other questions.
Nothing there. Anybody else? Okay, legal update? No legal update. Rennis isn't here. Unless anybody else has any more further comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Support.
Motion, support. We're going to have a roll call, please.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer,
Yes.
Mr. Cusero,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai,
Yes.
Ms. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Solomon, Mr. Tinlin.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.